So by show of hands, I'm going to give you the option of which example. One of them, I'm pretty sure where the guess or the vote's going to go, but let's just see what happens. One is my favorite. It's about graduations. I absolutely love graduations. Anybody want to hear about graduations? Or the second one is about bartending. So, right, I know. Who wants to hear about graduations? Thank you. Yeah, we got some. So does that just mean everybody else wants to hear about bartending? Yeah? Okay. All right. Lucky for y'all, I'm going to do both. And I'm actually going to start by saying this. I am not saying that bartending and having fun at a bar is the same as the example that I'm going to give to you at graduations, okay? However, cultures are vast. Cultures vary so significantly. And I use these two, one as more of a funny example, but to illustrate how even in the world of bartending, there's some cultural dynamics. And then the graduation is a bit more serious, in my opinion, and it's about religion and other cultural practices that we might think of as traditional cultural practices, right? And so I'm not saying that they are equal or have equal weight, but I do think that they're good illustrations of how vastly the cultural intelligence framework can be applied. So I'm going to start with bartending. All right, that's me. I know. Look way different, right? This was the last day of my bartending career. I think I mentioned to y'all last year when I was talking about around the bias content that I was a bartender during my undergraduate years. I was a bartender during my entire master's degree program, and I was a bartender during my entire PhD program. And even 6 months after I finished my PhD, I still bartended because I was not sure if this business thing was going to work out. So this is the very last day of my bartending career, and I think the only pictures that I have behind the bar. And I worked at the Varsity Theater, and if you're familiar with the Varsity Theater or the yesteryears of the Varsity Theater, you know that we did a number of different kinds of events. A lot of concerts, every kind of concert you could possibly imagine. We did rock shows, we did hip hop shows, we did jazz shows, you name it, we had them, right? Old school, new school, techno. I once had someone come up to me and ask if she could write, if I could sign her arm in a highlighter so that when the lights went off later and they started showing all the colorful lights, she could read on her arm what I wrote. This is a venue where everything was there, right? And we did a lot of private events. So maybe Cretek said, our annual event, we want to do it at the Varsity Theater. We're going to rent out the hall. We're going to have a band or some music, and we're going to have dinner, what have you. And then we did my least favorite, weddings. Had a lot of weddings. A lot of weddings. And weddings were my least favorite. Not because I don't enjoy people getting married. Come on, y'all. I'm not that horrible. There were long days, and mostly everybody at a wedding thinks they own the venue, right? Well, there was this one particular wedding on this Saturday afternoon into the evening, and we're bartending, and we were at the point of the day where many of you will be familiar with what is known as like that hour-long cocktail hour, right? Where very frequently pieces of the bar are hosted or free, right? Oftentimes it's beer and wine, right? So for this hour in particular, beer and wine was going to be free. And me and 2 or 3 other bartenders hit this rush. Everybody's getting off of buses and everybody gets there at the same time, and we are just getting smacked at the bar. It's busy. And we were the type of venue that had 8 draft beers. All of them are what might be known as craft beers, right? For those of you who don't drink, don't worry about it. This will make sense. Craft beers, oftentimes the ones that we served were local. They have what is known as some more hops. You might consider a little more flavorful, but also you kind of got to get used to the taste a little bit, right? You might not take a sip of that first Indian Pale Ale and you're like, oh, I love that right away. It might take you a little bit, right? And then we had one, what we call domestic, kind of old school light beer. Just one. It's actually my go-to, my favorite beer. C-, AKA Coors Light. I love me some C-. And I'm starting to notice some things. The people are coming in and no one's really ordering the craft beer. It's all C minus. And this C minus is moving, y'all. I'm talking about it's flowing, right? And at one point, one of my coworkers, he was starting to get a little frustrated. I said, what's going on? He said, they're not really tipping. He's getting frustrated that the tips aren't coming. Well, okay, I can understand that. We got to make money. Well, the tips aren't really flowing, and there's one guy in particular who's there, and he's coming up, and he's drinking Coors Light faster than anybody I've seen. And my coworker is getting more and more frustrated, and he comes up to me and says, Abdul, if that guy comes and gets one more drink and doesn't tip, I'm not serving him anymore. It's like, okay. So now I say, don't worry about it, I'll serve him. So I go, I get the C minus, and I come back and I serve the guy and I set it down in front of him, and then I go back to the draft beers. And when you're bartending, you know, I got my back to the crowd, so I'm pouring the beer and I'm kind of looking around and I'm surveying the bar to see who I'm going to help next, right? And as I look over, the guy that I just gave a C minus is still standing there. And I'm like, there's no way you drank that beer that fast. So I finished pouring the beer. I hand it to whoever I was giving it to, and I walk out and I say, hey, you all right? What can I get for you? And he held up 50 cents right in my face, and he dropped it in the tip jar. Now my coworker is furious. Here's the thing. Rule of thumb, you go to the bar, you order a drink, you give at least $1 per drink. All right? Just kind of rule of thumb. You don't always have to, but rule of thumb, $1 per drink. Sometimes more. Maybe you do the actual math calculation, you get 15, 20%, whatever, but kind of minimum $1 per drink is where we usually go. And Josh says, that is so offensive. He held that 50 cents up in front of your face and dropped it in the tip jar. I can't believe it. I'm done. I'm not serving him anymore. So I looked at Josh and I said, say, Josh, have you noticed a few more yahs in your nose than we usually get at the bar in Minneapolis? He said, well, what do you mean? I said, we're getting a lot more yahs in your nose, some more jeans than you usually recognize at a wedding. I'm overhearing some folks saying, oh, it's a 2-hour drive into the cities, or, you know, parking was so bad, traffic was heavy, right? And I start thinking to myself, and I'm saying, Josh, like, I think we might be dealing with a crowd that's not used to the $1 tip per drink, number one. Number two, I said, Josh, you ever travel out of the country much? He said, nope. I said, you got to go to Europe one time. He said, why? I said, you know, in Europe, they actually don't tip at all. He said, what? They don't tip? I said, yeah, when we Americans get there, they're like, these dumb Americans, we're about to get a bunch of tips. And so I said to him, I said, Josh, I don't think that guy was trying to be offensive with his 50 cents. I actually think that 50 cents means something and holds a lot of value to him. And not that he was trying to be offensive by giving me half of what you're used to every time you pour a drink, but I actually think that 50 cents was important to him, and he wanted me to know that he was giving me that 50 cents to complement the work that I was doing. Now, here's the thing about this. Josh wasn't necessarily happy after this conversation because Josh still got to pay rent. Josh didn't necessarily make any more money after this conversation, and Josh still has to pay rent. But what did happen was Josh was introduced to some new cultural intelligence and some new information that made his interaction with that customer and that guest different throughout the rest of the night. Josh was able to serve the person without any malice, without any anger, but instead a new understanding of your dollar is not equal to my dollar. Your dollar is not the same as we think about it. Your dollar might be worth more or go farther in your context than my context. And so to you, your 50 cents might be how I think of a dollar. And the night for him, as he interacted with that guest, who did not stop coming up for C minus, was completely different because of a little bit of cultural intelligence.